absurd to think that something growing exponentially will somehow just drop off, right? There's no shared understanding or definition of what consciousness is. A robot is a material construct that is able to sense, autonomously take decisions and actions in a physical environment. You're never going to pick the first apple if you go to the store, but that's what the shopper is going to do. But we're also giving them a model that will always be 3 to 5 times faster than the fastest delivery that exists today. It's in our minds, it's inevitable that in the future there are going to be self-driving shops on every street, every neighborhood across the world, which can be hailed as easy as tapping a button.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good. How about you?
Going well. Thanks so much for having me.
For sure. I'm Taron, founder at Nox Labs. This is welcome to the 3rd episode of Bend Reality, where I talk with founders that bend the reality around them to produce and put forth new products in XR space, in robotics, and AI. My guest today is Ali Ahmed. Ali is a roboticist building the future of retail through his startup Robomart, the world's first developer of self-driving shops. He has served as a mentor at Singularity University, a robotics expert to Wefunder, and is the author of Systema Robotica, a forthcoming treatise on the order and evolution of Robotkind.
Correct.
That's gonna be fun. So a little about Robomart. Robomart has built the world's first store hailing platform through its fleets of self-driving shops, enabling retailers to expand their footprint at a fraction of the cost, while giving consumers the ability to get goods in the fastest, cheapest, and most convenient way possible. It was founded by Ali Ahmed and my other friend Tigran Shaverzian, both with a deep domain expertise in robotics, retail, and on-demand delivery. Robomart is venture-backed with $3.5 million in funding and on a mission to enable the near teleportation of goods. Love it. So, can you dive a bit into like the concept of store hailing? I think you guys were the first to pioneer the concept of on-demand mobile retail store that you call store hailing, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Like there's ride hailing like Uber and Lyft. What's store hailing?
No, it's a great question. And, you didn't mention Ahmad's also a 3rd co-founder.
Oh,
so
Ahmed.
Rahim,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
So we're 3 co-founders. Ahmad actually had the original idea. We used to work together 14 years ago, and he wanted to recreate the ice cream van model, but for everything else in retail. And this predates smartphones. This predates, the App Store. So it was way ahead of its time. But when I moved to the US, I had worked in on-demand delivery in London and kind of learned the ins and outs of that business. And I moved to the US and I got back in touch with Ahmad, told him about my experiences and the challenges that I faced with delivery. And he connected that old idea that he had. And we basically came up with the concept of store hailing. The idea was if you can hail a store. Back then, it was pick up a rotary dial phone and say, send the store to me. But when we thought about it again, we're like, this can be app based, this can be SMS based, and it can literally be as easy as an Uber, right? When you hail an Uber, you're not bothering about doing anything else. You're just tapping one button and then waiting for it to arrive. It can take 3, 4, 5 minutes, on average. Usually you're not waiting more than 10 minutes for an Uber to show up. And when it arrives, you get in, go to your destination. Everything is kind of, seamless. It's all through the app, payment, and you just get out. And we realized that we can create that same experience within the world of delivery. But to do so, we had to rethink delivery completely. Everyone in the delivery space, whether they're trying to do quick commerce in 15, 20 minutes, if they're trying to do, on-demand delivery for groceries like Instacart, they all have the exact same pre-ordered model for delivery where you have to create a basket, order the items first on an app or a website, place the order, have somebody go shop for it or have it packed and then delivered. And all these delivery companies, when they talk about 15, 20-minute delivery times, they're ignoring that whole process. They're just talking about from the time the order's packed and picked up to the time it gets to you. by creating a store that can be hailed, that is autonomous, it has a frictionless auto checkout system, and it can be hailed on demand. We're not only giving retailers the ability to, deploy stores at 90% less cost, but we're also giving them a model that will always be 3 to 5 times faster than the fastest delivery that exists today.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. You guys are you're fighting against like the notions set by like Instacart and Uber, and thinking of it from the opposite end in a sense. Like I never thought that the concept that like Instacart like shops for you, brings it to you. It's nice, but you're kind of, those things might not be available at the store, right? So with Robomart, you're able to see what's available and call for that in a sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'll walk you through the end consumer experience. They would use the retailer's app or their website, or even SMS to hail a store. And once they do, they get to see on a map how far away it is. And when it's assigned, it tells them it's going to be 5, 6, 7 minutes away. During our pilots, the average time was 9 minutes, end to end for the entire pilot phase. And when the Robomart arrives, they get a push notification that it's arrived. They go outside, they open the door through the app. There's a mechanism to open the door.
Nice.
It's all automated. There's no handle on the door either. The door opens. And at that point, they can start shopping. Now, they can physically shop at their doorstep. There's never been, a possibility like that ever before. So they have the entire store in front of them. If they hail an ice cream shop, a Ben & Jerry's, Robomart, they're able to grab, ice cream that's frozen at the highest quality right at their doorstep. The biggest problem with delivery is that ice cream will melt. It has a shot clock. If you go to the store and get it, the same thing. And beyond that, even with groceries, it's very tangible, right? A lot of times you don't want to rely on somebody picking. They're never going to pick the first apple. You're never going to pick the first apple if you go to the store, but that's what the shopper is going to do. They're not going to check expiry on the bread packet or your salmon packet, but you always do. And so we want to give consumers that in-person shopping experience at their home.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Like, you guys are tackling a very old problem in humanity, where like we've seen like newer versions of it, where like there's like 10, 20 years ago, or like I've seen some like about like probably 5 years ago too, where there's like trucks coming like to the back, like to the neighborhood, and like the guy opens his like cargo doors and like people go shop, or like the ice cream trucks here in the US were very, very active. But it's like a very old, basic human concept. Like before, people with carts, they would come, and it's
exactly.
Like it kind of brings this joy too with it, right? And like where it's the food's coming to you, and
Yeah.
you get to choose.
Absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. In a lot of countries across the world, I mean, in the US, you had the ice cream van model.
Yeah.
But you have had that in a lot of countries in Asia where they would have push carts, right? They would bring meats, vegetables, pretty much anything around neighborhoods. And then they would yell. They would either have a jingle or they would have a megaphone where they would just yell out what they were trying to sell. And people would rush out. They'd get fresh goods right there at their doorstep. And, we're basically creating an autonomous version of that.
I want to ask you, how does it feel? Like, at least in me, there's this dichotomy where when you're like on the edge of like working on new technologies, you kind of like, that takes you on a momentum of like you want to stay on that edge, but you guys are mixing it with like a very old problem. It's like food, and food like like delivery is a new word for it, but
getting access to food.
Yeah. So it's, for me, like when I work on like something new, like I'm like in the like VR XR field, right? I kind of tend to ignore like the problems of the now, and like in my mind it's like, oh, those are like old school problems. Like I might not need to think about it. And I like end up
Yeah.
like on that. Do you have that or?
Yeah, I mean it's a very very interesting point that you bring up, and it's true to some degrees, because the way we see it is, we are creating, our vision is to have self-driving shops, right, which retailers can deploy and scale up very rapidly. And it's in our minds, it's inevitable that in the future there are going to be self-driving shops on every street, every neighborhood across the world, which can be hailed as easy as tapping a button, right? And to get there, there's going to be certain steps that we're going to have to take. But what we realized is that we're not really in the business of autonomous vehicles. We're in the business of this new shopping experience and this new retail channel, right? Which is the first new retail channel in 30 years, 35 years now. E-commerce was the last big new retail channel. And some might argue that, shopping on Instagram or social media is a retail channel. But the reality is that after e-commerce, there's really not been a new way to get goods until now. What store hailing does is, by creating this new retail channel, it allows people to get goods in a much more convenient way while shopping at home, right? Without having to go to the store or without having to rely on someone to pick their goods or create a basket and go through that process. And so, by virtue of looking at it from that perspective, it is about solving problems for consumers. It is about solving problems for retailers. It's about creating a platform for them to really expand their footprint, increase sales, and give consumers the most convenient option. So we are kind of solving those problems, legacy problems that have existed for the longest time. But because we feel it's inevitable and we have that future vision where in the future, pretty much every store will be autonomous, right? Not only autonomous in the sense of, a frictionless shopping experience, checkout free, auto checkout, but also autonomous in how it moves. So that's how I look at it. It's what's interesting is that you brought up this idea of future vision. A lot of companies that have a long-term future vision end up creating new categories, like NVIDIA, right, is one example. Jensen Huang kind of set out with this very big vision of creating chips for a lot of different industries. And then they realized to get there is going to take a couple of decades, right? To build chips for AI, to build chips for robots is going to take time. And so they focused on certain categories like gaming, eventually became synonymous with gaming, but the reality was that they had a very big grand vision. And now 20 years later, that's coming to fruition, and they're the third largest company in the world. So by having a very big vision, I think, we have the opportunity to really, really build something meaningful and lasting for the next few decades.
Two points from there. You brought up a good point about e-commerce kind of being the end state of like new commerce, and like kind of like Instagram stuff, kind of like they're not new categories but extension of that, and a new way of like expanding that is bringing the commerce to you in a sense. Would that work for like shopping in VR, for example? Is that to you? Is that expanding still e-commerce footprint, or is that bringing in new experience?
It's a good question, right? Again, I don't know that much about the VR space, but from what I do know and what I've seen with VR implementations and AR implementations in commerce, a few years ago there was this concept. I don't know if they've really taken off or not, where in subway stations they would have this augmented reality on the kind of the glass doors of the subway before the trains, before you get on the platform for the trains, where they would have all the products, almost like a virtual shelf of a grocery store. And you could literally shop there, and then it would trigger an order and then have that delivered by the time you get home, right? Very interesting concept, but it still relies on the existing model of e-commerce. Have someone place an order, right? In this case, it's more visual, it's more engaging. Instead of looking at a tiny screen and spending, I love Instacart, but it can take 40 minutes to create a basket,
it's
right?
too much.
It's too
It's
much.
too much, yeah.
So by using AR, VR and services like that, you can create a better experience for the shopping part of it, but the delivery part is still based on that antiquated e-commerce model.
Another point from there is we talked about having a big vision, big mission. Did you go out with having that initially, or did you discover that in the process?
No, we had that vision from day one, right? It kind of stemmed from what Ahmed had come up with when we worked together, right, 15 years ago, as well as my experiences in the on-demand delivery space, right? I kind of lived through that for many years, and I realized that it's a broken model, right? If you have the existing model of delivery, of pre-ordering goods and having someone have to go and pick it up and pick and pack and then deliver it, the costs are just too high, labor costs, and that ends up translating into extremely high service fees and delivery fees for consumers, right? So yes, you can make it work and be profitable, but at very high expense and cost to the end consumer. And so by thinking about automation and ways to reduce that cost and make it more palatable for users, we started thinking about, okay, how do we solve those problems? But it didn't really click until we were able to think of that big vision of rethinking delivery, right? When we thought, automating delivery using robots or these sidewalk robots, which a lot of companies are doing, which is great, but at the end of the day, they're not a paradigm shift, right? They will take the same amount of time or even longer as a human to make a delivery. And yes, they do shave off some labor cost by reducing the cost, of not having labor deliver it. They either have a tiny form factor, so they can only carry one order at a time. So it's really just incremental improvements. But if you have a bigger vision and you can rethink delivery completely and look at it from a new perspective, what we did with store hailing, I think that's what gets it to be very exciting. And so, to answer your question, yes, there was this big vision attached to what we were trying to do, but we were also trying to solve, these everyday problems that I lived through when I was doing my startup in on-demand delivery.
Yeah, I think it's really important having a North Star, and it aligns everything after it. Like I've gone through initially. My previous startup having a North Star, with this one discovering the North Star in the process, right? Like where we want to help companies launch and get discovered with their VR, AR products, and create this whole ecosystem that everyone talks to each other, is not closed off. So I think it's very, very important, because that kind of causes less entropy, to be it's less chaotic. It's anti-entropic in a sense, because if you have one person or one mind setting a kind of pushes, if you think of a mind as kind of a planet, pushes gravity, the space-time apart, and other objects start falling into that, right, with the Earth around the sun.
Sure, yeah.
If you think of start to think of minds as that, where it creates new, kind of from a point of singularity, pushes the current knowns and unknowns apart in the psyche space, human space, and then other minds start going into that well that's created.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. How did you and I want to go back to Ahmad's experience, and your experience. What were you guys doing before?
So yeah, I started my career at GSK, the pharmaceutical. Then I worked at Unilever, and that's where I worked together with Ahmed. We're cousins as well, but we had a chance to work together. So he was in ice cream, the ice cream division, in Unilever, and I was in the beverages division. And so we weren't.
One sec. So what's Unilever and what did that do?
Sure. So Unilever is one of the biggest FMCG kind of CPG companies in the world. They make Lipton teas. They make
what's CPG?
Consumer packaged goods.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
sorry. Yeah, it's industry.
I know. I use it a lot.
Yeah,
too,
yeah, exactly. But P&G, Unilever, these are some of the biggest CPG kind of consumer packaged good companies in the world, and Unilever is the largest ice cream company as well, right? They're now divesting that into a separate entity, but they basically own Ben & Jerry's, Talenti, Magnum, Good Humor, and so they have a lot of different brands. They also have beverage and food brands like Knorr on the food side, Lipton on the tea side, and so I was in the tea division. And Ahmed was in ice cream, right? Walls, the ice cream portfolio.
Like, very old, human things, like tea, ice cream. It's cool.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so much tea was sold, and we were in Pakistan at the time, right? And so I was the brand manager for the largest brand of tea in Pakistan. And we used to measure sales in tons of volume, right? Like it's not
crazy.
Small. The amount of consumption of tea in Pakistan is just through the roof. And so and ice cream as well. I mean, in the US, I think the average consumption of ice cream is 20 pounds per American per year.
Wow.
So it is just off the charts in terms of consumption numbers. And so Ahmed was in ice cream, and that's where he originally had the idea, right? To recreate that ice cream van. And because obviously we were cousins and we worked together, we were in different divisions, but we would get together over lunch and he would tell me the ideas. And, I loved the idea at that time. And I was like, it's a little ahead of its time, right? To figure out how to do it on demand. Exactly. Yeah. This predates anything on demand. This predates, smartphones or app stores. And so, we created a kind of template, a business plan and all that, but then we parked that idea. And then, as you were asking about my experience in on-demand delivery, I moved to London. I did another master's. I had my MBA and then I did another master's from Lancaster University. Moved to London, joined Groupon at the time. I wanted to get into tech. And so I joined Groupon, saw that company go from, it was My City Deal run by the Samwar brothers, the infamous Samwar brothers. Oh. And they essentially got acquired by Groupon. And I was there at that time. I saw that process kind of being undertaken. And I saw the company go from something like, 30, 35 employees to 300 almost overnight. And, people talk about overnight successes and there's really no example of overnight success. It always takes way longer than that.
We see that crux point always.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
It's yeah.
But you don't see the months and months and years of prep before that. But to be fair, that's probably the closest example of overnight success that I've seen. Groupon hasn't done tremendously well after the IPO, but it was a very exciting time in tech to be involved in a company like that. They were, I think, on the cover of Forbes or Fast Company or one of those, as the fastest growing company in history. So it was a great experience, and I think the biggest takeaway from my time at Groupon was that I saw, the CEO of My City Deal, who then became senior exec at Groupon in London, eyes bloodshot, never slept, just literally working around the clock. And he was an entrepreneur at heart, right? He started My City Deal with the Samwars. And, I took a cue from him and I said, he inspired me because I said, if he can do this, right? And I've seen him on a day-to-day basis.
That's very important.
It is, seeing other entrepreneurs.
It's a human going through living. And we always look at it from the outside, Musk this or
the
this,
glamour
that.
of entrepreneurship. But the reality is that it's a lot harder. It's probably the hardest thing that people can do in business. And I saw the good sides and the bad sides, and I was like, it inspired me. It said, I should go out and start my first company. That's what I did. I left Groupon, started my first company, Lootbox. And I've been doing startups for more than a decade ever since, almost 12 years, 13 years now. But to cut a long story short, I started Dispatch, which was the on-demand delivery company in London, in 2015. And the idea was that people could request products just by SMSing, or through chat. We actually then developed an app where you could literally just send a chat message of what you wanted. People would send their entire grocery basket list. They would send,
nice.
Interestingly, HTC Vives were brand new, I think, back then in 2015. So I remember one of our orders was for somebody throwing an event around virtual reality, and they ordered something like 16 HTC Vives. And the whole idea with dispatch was that we would find it, buy it, and deliver it within the hour. And it just took off.
When
people
was
loved
this?
that experience. This is 2015.
It's pretty early.
Yeah, people loved that experience. Again, some orders would be things like HTC Vives, but the majority orders were for grocery or for ice cream or for, the really fast moving goods that people want on a day-to-day basis. And, I started looking at, the cost of fulfilling these deliveries. Number one, we had the cost of an operator who would search for the items, make sure it's available, and then place the order. And then we would have to cover the cost. We had about 1,500 dispatchers in the network. We would have to cover the cost of their delivery, right? And the average was about 9-10 pounds, just the average delivery costs and service fees that we would charge the customer. So to make it work, I mean, that's what, $15-18? Just to make it work, you have to charge that amount. And so I realized that, to make this model work of on-demand delivery, you have to start looking at automation. But then, like I talked about, that's not enough. You have to go one step further and kind of rethink the whole paradigm of delivery and pre-ordered goods.
That's why Uber and all these services, they cost that much, yeah? Because it's like a really cost heavy on having that operation in the background. Because like you buy something for like $20, it turns out to be like 40, 50.
You're absolutely right. The amount of service fees and delivery fees that they tack on, not to mention tip, right? With Robomart, there's no tipping. But one of my friends, he was early on the team that built Amazon Prime now. I think they've kind of shuttered that because it just didn't work, right? But he told me that the average fees that they would charge consumers was $9. So from my experience at dispatch, from what I've learned from him, it's just astronomical, the amount of fees that these on-demand delivery companies charge. And it's really not going to get a lot better. Even with a lot of these fully automated, fully autonomous delivery robot companies out there, the sidewalk delivery robots, the ones that are doing on-road like Neuro, when they ran their pilots and their first operations, they were still charging a pretty high delivery fee for a fully automated experience because of the fact that you still have that whole pick and pack process and you have, the pre-ordering of goods. And to really get around that, you not only have to look at automation, but you have to rethink that whole model.
Switching gears a little.
Yeah.
What's a robot for you?
So that's a very, very interesting question, and one that I've been thinking about for almost a decade, right? I'm writing this treatise, Systema Robotica, that is on the order and evolution of Robotkind. And what it essentially does, it'll hopefully be published soon, but the idea is that first of all, it defines what is a robot. So to answer your question, the way I've defined it is a robot is a material construct that is able to sense and autonomously take decisions and actions in a physical environment. And so material construct is, again, a slightly, I'd say a slightly open-ended term, but essentially it covers any physical embodiment, any material product that is constructed, designed, engineered, and constructed to operate autonomously in a physical world. And it also allows for the definition to cover certain very interesting robot types, right, that I've kind of defined in the taxonomy. Something like a holographic robot.
Can you go over those types? I remember you telling.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'll kind of talk briefly about the first level of the hierarchy of the taxonomy. Because the treatise hasn't been published yet, I don't want to get into too much detail. But I've defined the taxonomy to have certain levels, and I've kind of mimicked the biological classification. And taking one step back, the vast majority of taxonomies that exist for robots today are based on functionality. And I fundamentally believe that's the wrong approach. So I've taken a little bit of a contrarian approach, because when you think about an android, right, that's designed to be a butler or a kitchen chef, right, that android can very easily work in a factory alongside, a factory robot. The robot is the same. It's a different functionality. So the amount of overlap, same thing with drones, right? A drone could be operating, over agricultural, like for agriculture, that could be repurposed to do photography, aerial photography. So by defining robots by function, I think is the wrong approach. There's just too much overlap. So what I've done is I've created something called design form that considers a robot's design, its form, and its branding. And that is the rubric I use to kind of define and classify robots. And, the top level is realm. And without getting into too much detail, the realm of robots comes under robotica. I'm not going to really share the other realms. That's something for the treatise for people to read. But within robotica, the realm of robotica, the first level of classification is type, robot type. Below that is scheme, and then mark, and then model, and then unit. But within type, which is the first kind of the top level of the hierarchy, there are 6 major types. And the way I kind of categorize robots is that they will all fall under past, present, or future will have to fall under one of these 6 types. And so, I talked about holographic robots. I call them virtuoids in the treatise, and they fall under the type of spectra. So spectra covers shape-shifting robots like morph bots, covers virtuoids, which are holographic entities. And I want to talk a little bit about this. And the reason why I'm specifically talking about this is because there's a company out of Japan. This is not science fiction. This is real. There's a company in Japan that has built a hologram robot that exists in a physical casing. And essentially it projects a anime character that can talk to you, that can play games with you, and that eventually people have relationships with, right? It's inevitable. But that virtuoid is called Gatebox. That product or that company is called Gatebox. And so that's just one example. We classify Robomarts under the Auton scheme, which is under the major type, robot type of vessel. And within vessels are not just, robots that operate on land, but also on air, in space, underwater. And so by defining robots by their design form, I think we can create a taxonomy that will be as robust as possible and that is future forward.
And design form is defined by its physicality?
Correct. By the way that its appearance, its design, its branding, which is also part of design form, and the form, the actual physical structure and form of the robot.
So functions become byproducts of...
Exactly. It become byproducts of its design form. So my thinking and my theory here is that design form informs intended operating functionality and operating environment.
It's kind of like the human or like the animal, right? Like the body defines the function, and then function can be many. Am I right? Like, it's like calling someone an engineer human, but where they're just human, and like one of the things they do is engineering. Is that the kind of approach?
Correct. That's exactly it. I mean, there's so much overlap. Like humans can do so much, right? So if you start creating a taxonomy of humans based on functionality, it just would become unwieldy and it just wouldn't work, right? Because, you're an engineer, but you're also a founder. You're also a podcast presenter. You've got so many roles and functions. But I can define you based on your countenance, based on your appearance, right? You're a certain height. You look a certain way. And of course you can shave your beard, but you have a beard right now. So
I shave it sometimes.
Yeah. And by classifying, so, within the taxonomy, it also considers size of robots. So there's one type, megatech, that is defined by the size of the robot. So if it's larger than the threshold, it would fall under the type of megatech. So design form, I feel, is a much better way to create a taxonomy that is future thinking and future forward compared to functionality.
That's very interesting. And so the decisions so can they make decisions on their own? So it's a body that interacts with the environment, gets feedback back through sensors,
and then makes a decision.
And then
That's
makes
the
a
critical
decision.
part. Yeah, the critical part.
And then acts back on the environment.
Exactly. The most critical part in defining a robot is understanding if it can make a decision based on its sensory data, right? There's one section of the treatise where I compare robot to other things, right? So one of them is comparing it to machines. And so if
I like that you're not considering it a machine. You're just like
no, of course, yeah,
separate.
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a very important distinction to make. Is what is a machine, what is a robot, right? A lot of people think a telepresence kiosk, right? So if you've ever gone to these hotels where they have a telepresence kiosk with somebody who's usually overseas, you can see their face, and it can even move. They can navigate around the area, and they can talk to the customer, make their booking, and pull up their booking, and then issue them the hotel keys. People consider that a robot, but it's not a robot if it cannot act autonomously and take a decision based on sensory inputs, right? It's being teleoperated. Similarly, a dishwasher. A lot of people. So this is a very contentious thing within the robotics world. A lot of roboticists, bring up the example of a dishwasher, right? And
this is like the Fermi products of robotics.
Exactly. And some of them, may not a lot of them, but some of them may think to call a dishwasher a robot, because from one perspective, a dishwasher is taking a decision to wash dishes, and but the argument
Current
is that
dishwashers or
yeah. I mean,
okay.
even modern dishwashers might even be able to check soil level or dirt level on plates and kind of adjust the output. Similar to like a sprinkler system. It could work in a similar way. But the way that I've defined it is that if that sprinkler system or that dishwasher can take in multiple data points, multiple sensory inputs, and then take a decision in real time and act on it and change its output and change what it actually does physically and impacts its physical environment, then it is a robot. So if dishwashers and sprinklers become so advanced that they're actually doing that, then they would be classed as robots.
Say it again, the last part.
If a sprinkler system or a dishwasher, right now it's taking in, basically one sensory input, or it's pre-programmed, and it basically, based on time of day, it'll sprinkle, or, based on the load and the weight of the load, it'll run for a certain period of time, right? If instead it can take a decision in real time based on its sensory inputs, and then effect change, right? Like actually change how much water is actually being dispensed, how much soap is being dispensed, how long it's going to run for, if it needs to do an extra cycle, then it is by definition a robot, because it's taken its sensory inputs. It's a material construct that's taken sensory inputs and made a decision to change its environment.
How does it make a decision? Like, where are we now with it? We have a lot of like Gen AI, right? Like a lot of LLMs, still not considered intelligence in a sense. Like large language models, they're large language models, right? It's like huge amounts of data and predicting the next token or word next to like this token. So how do you define intelligence? Like how do you define where it is a robot in a sense?
It's a very good question, and I think I do actually define artificial intelligence in the treatise, and it builds upon tremendous amount of research from people that have thought about not only what cognition and intelligence means, but also what artificial intelligence means as it exists in its current form as pure software or as embodied kind of into robots. But my argument is that all robots are artificially intelligent if they can take decisions and they have sensory input and they can take decisions and act on it. Then they have a baseline intelligence. Intelligence is important, but AI and robots are going to be, especially artificial intelligence is going to be getting smarter and smarter and smarter, more and more and more intelligent, right? It's going to grow on an exponential growth path, and like anything, it will continue. I mean, it's absurd to think that something growing exponentially, that first had the intelligence of animals like a mouse, and then had intelligence of a chimpanzee, and then have intelligence of a human, will somehow just drop off, right? Like it'll grow like this, but then it'll kind of peter out right here. The reality is that it'll continue on that path. It'll become more and more and more intelligent. Whether you call that super intelligence, ultra intelligence, it doesn't really matter. It's going to become more and more intelligent. The real question is, how does it relate to how we as humans think of certain concepts? How do we think of sentience? How do we think of consciousness, right? And this is where the treatise, it gets a little bit philosophical, but the core of the treatise is to define robots in the taxonomy. But I realized that when thinking about in the future of robots and coexistence with humanity, you have to address things like superintelligence. You have to address sentience in robots. And sentience means a lot of different things, right? Some people define sentience as, having feelings. And for any creature to have feelings, or any biological creature to have feelings, they would consider them sentient. And then others regard sentience as more of consciousness, right? So they essentially equate sentience with consciousness. It's almost like a synonym. What I've done in the treatise is I've created an equation for sentience that considers a number of different things. I don't want to go into too much detail. Again, it's still not published, but when it is published, people will be able to see how that sentience equation has been set up, and the treatise then explores the concept of consciousness. Right now, we have a lot of theories of consciousnesses, but that's what they are. They're theories. There's no shared understanding or definition of what consciousness is. And without getting too philosophical, I realized that we need to have a simple, straightforward way to understand if an artificial intelligence or a robot is sentient. So I've created a test for sentience. And I think a lot of tests that are used today to judge intelligence in AI are outdated.
Like the Turing test. Turing test is very outdated.
It is absolutely outdated. And it's more of an imitation game. That's how it kind of started off. And that's how Alan Turing kind of defined in his paper, Imitation Game. It's more about tricking.
He didn't have the data and knowledge of now to define it, I guess. Right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, in the 50s, it was way ahead of its time. And it was, for a very long time, a very definitive test and a way to qualify whether AI is able to deceive people or not. But now it's not so much about deceiving people. It's about understanding if they are sentient, if they are able to exist and coexist in society, and if they do reach that stage. And I know this sounds, again, very science fiction-y, but
it should.
It absolutely is a reality. We have to consider these things. Some of the top AI researchers in the world, I mean, the godfather of AI, Hinton, he believes that there's some form of consciousness, right? Ilya Sutskever, he believes that, a couple of years ago, he put out a tweet that said that, AI have some level of consciousness. But what are those levels? How do we define it? What do we think about it, right? I'm absolutely not a philosopher or a philosopher of the mind, but I've tried to enlist some of the foremost thinkers in the space onto the review panel of Systema Robotica. And so by talking to them and understanding their perspective of what it means to be sentient, I'm forming this I'd say more holistic understanding. But to kind of, come back to the point, we have to start thinking practically, right? I'm a founder of a robotics company. I like to think that I'm practical, right? So these are heady concepts. These are philosophical questions that have been asked for a very long time. But with the pace of growth of AI and robotica, we have to start asking these questions now. And that's what I aim to do with this treatise, is to ask these questions and to see if we can have some kind of shared understanding of what it means to be sentient for an AI, and how that impacts society. What roles do robots take? The last section of the treatise talks about the role of robots, and I've created sort of a chart that differentiates robots based on their level of autonomy and intelligence, as well as their strength of relationship and emotional bond with humans. So they will fall anywhere within those 9 roles. And you have extreme roles like robot as slave. If it's highly intelligent and we have a very poor relationship with it, we will treat them as slaves. But on the other extreme, if we have a very intimate relationship, people will start marrying their robots. It's bound to happen, right? And again, it sounds a little absurd right now, but it will happen. People will form partnerships with robots in the future. So we have to start thinking about these from a practical lens now, before it's something that we are forced to think about.
I want to get into a little. We have about 6-7 minutes left. Sure. The Autonomous Retail Collective that you started, what is it?
So the Autonomous Retail Collective, or ARC, is a consortium of partners that are working towards developing self-driving shops and the whole ecosystem around it. When we started a few years ago, we were pretty much the only players in the space and the only ones talking about self-driving shops as a category. And what's really exciting to us is now that we are able to bring in a number of our existing partners and hopefully in the future other partners to build this ecosystem. One of our partners, Avery Dennison, they're the largest RFID company in the world. They're working collaboratively with us to supply, expertise and the technology and the products of enabling that auto checkout system that we've built that uses RFID. And on the other hand, we have, our fleet partner Zeba that is working with us to own all the vehicles in the fleet. And as we scale and get more retailers on board, we have signed contracts for 102 Robomarts right now that will start rolling out this summer. And as we scale this up, fleet partners are going to take a much larger role in this building this ecosystem. Similarly, we have a few other partners as well, like Whale Dynamic and Pix on the vehicle side and the AV side. But the idea is that we're bringing together an ecosystem of partners to really build this category that we think is going to be, the first new retail channel in 30 years.
I love that. I love that it's not like every man for himself. And especially for like an emerging sector like yours, like we have the same problem in like the VR, XR industry. It's very fragmented. Everyone's for themselves, and like the big guys are like Meta, and they're doing a lot of good work, but they're just purely doing it like as like a single point of abstraction in a sense, right? Like, which is fine. It drives the industry forward, but like not having a collective where we're building for the same thing, and the whole point is to like make the whole pie bigger for everyone and help each other and like talk to each other and be transparent. That's like become my mission as well with Nox, is like to bring everyone together so they can like bundle and sell the same products together. Like we're like for the customer, it doesn't matter like what they want it to work. And in order to do that, it has to be very transparent, very open. So I'm actually going to take a note from you.
That would be great. Yeah.
Replicate the collective for our industry as well.
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. Then thanks for that. A little. One thing I want. How can people get started with Robomart? Like, and I know you guys are concentrating on the ice cream industry, right? But
sure.
I also want people to think of like that. This is not something like so far ahead. Like the whole idea is that you have a store that's local, and with Robomart, you're just able to extend its reach around the neighborhood, right?
Absolutely.
That's the general basis. Like how can store owners get started, and what industry are you concentrating right now?
Absolutely. So our first gen Robomarts, which you see right there, are driven. So there is a driver in there, which allows the model to scale up rapidly. But as you can see, the windows are tinted. It's fully automated for the consumer. So whether it's the first gen Robomart or our second gen fully driverless Robomart, the experience for the end consumer is exactly identical. And so what we've done is we've created a model that is extremely profitable for retailers, extremely profitable for us, and very convenient and time saving for the end consumer. We're hyper focused right now on ice cream parlors, cafes, and QSRs. And I think quick service restaurants, QSRs, and cafes are a very interesting target for us because, imagine a donut and coffee Robomart. Imagine
so awesome.
Yeah, hot food Robomart. Right now, obviously, like you said, we're focused on ice cream. The vast majority of our early customers are ice cream players, but we do have contracts with a restaurant in LA that has set up a grocerant that's going to do prepackaged, ready-to-eat meals. And then we also have a retailer out in Boston that is going to do more cafe and food-on-the-go type fare. But right now we do not have any player in the kind of coffee donut space, but I think that would be an amazing category, especially for the form factor and for the first gen Robomarts. And the fact that we can allow these retailers to get pretty much the equivalent amount of sales from a Robomart as they would a physical brick and mortar, but at 90% less cost, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
That's why so many of them have come on board and signed contracts.
It's not like others take fees more from the store, right? Like with Uber Eats and stuff
and they take away your end customer. Right?
Yeah.
We don't. We're not a marketplace. We white label the entire app experience for each retailer. We are building the platform as a B2B company. And so there, again, a lot of advantages over some of these marketplace companies that take away the consumer, take away that relationship from the retailer.
I love that.
And charge them a huge amount to just operate. And they still do it. They still do it for competitive reasons and because they need that additional upsell. If they can do it in a better way, why not?
Last 30 seconds.
Sure.
What's your favorite book?
Nonfiction or science fiction?
Science fiction.
Science fiction, Foundation or Dune.
Oh, nice.
I read Dune when I was 11 or 12, and then I read the entire 6-book series. It is, I love the movies. They're great, but, the books just take you to a different level.
Ali, thank you so much. Pleasure having you.
Thank you, Tar.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah.